It's time for The Real Messiah with your host, Messianic Jewish author and scholar, Dr. Michael Brown. Here to open up the scriptures, answer your questions, and help you discover Israel's true Messiah. Join the discussion now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome, friends, to tonight's Real Messiah broadcast. Michael Brown, delighted to be with you. Thanks so much for tuning in. To all of our friends all over New York listening on 570 AM The Mission, welcome to the broadcast. To our Jewish friends listening, viewing, perhaps on our feed online, Facebook or YouTube, those who differ with me, so glad you've taken the time to tune in tonight. And we're going to do something special, unusual, never done this particular thing before, but phone lines are open. We do that all the time, 866-34-TRUTH. 866-348-7884. But here's what we're going to do that's different. You can call in and simply raise an objection to Jesus being the Messiah. You don't have to believe this objection. It can be something you read or heard, came across online, came across interacting with a Jewish friend. If you call in and state the objection, of course, we'll answer it so it can be a learning experience for everyone viewing the broadcast, listening to the broadcast, but we want to send you a free book when you do it. And it'll be The Real Kosher Jesus. Yeah, the full book, my response to Rabbi Shmuley's book, Kosher Jesus. But it's not just a response to him, it's a standalone book. It's my #1 book to give to a Jewish person who wants to find out more about Jesus being the Messiah. And it's my #1 book to give to a Christian who wants to find out more about the Jewish background to Jesus. So all you have to do is call in 866-348-7884 and say, okay, Jesus, Yeshua can't be the Messiah because, now, if you personally believe this to be true, in other words, if this is your objection, then by all means, let us know, okay? If this is an objection you heard, or you can preface it by saying, by the way, I don't believe in this personally, but either way, I want to give you a free copy of The Real Kosher Jesus. Now, one thing, I can only do this if you live in the States. All right? Can't do this if you're calling in from Indonesia or something like that. Caller today on a radio show called in from Italy. So we often get international calls because it's so easy to access things internationally. But the offer to send the book is for everyone in the United States. You don't just have to be in New York City listening on MCA. Wherever you are in America, calling in, you give the objection, we'll give the response to it. Now, next week, I won't be taking any calls. Why? Because I'll be in India. And aside from the fact that the time that the show would be going on here, I'll be speaking, God willing, to Indian leaders, Indian Christian leaders, and spending quality time with them. Aside from that, it's not feasible for us to always get a good connection from India to do live broadcasts. So because of that, we pre-recorded a show that I think you'll really find fascinating, having to do with debates with rabbis. So I think you'll find this really, really fascinating next week's broadcast, but I won't be taking calls. Today, though, I do want to get your take. If you're a Jewish person listening to the broadcast, I want to get your take about someone going to a country like India, Hindu country. There's a growing Christian population. There's a minority Muslim population as well. But there is it is predominantly a Hindu country. So they are, by definition, idol worshipers, polytheists. How do you feel about someone like me going over there, or just anyone going over to India, or an Indian Christian telling other Hindus about Jesus, and their lives are dramatically changed and wonderfully changed? How do you feel about that? Is that a good thing? Is that a right thing? Is that a positive thing? And now they read the Bible instead of following their different deities. They believe in one God only. Their lives are wonderfully transformed and far better than they were before. Is that a good thing? Is that a positive thing? So we'll come back to that in a moment. But first, let's start with your calls. We go to Stephen in Orlando. Welcome to The Real Messiah.
Hey, I had two questions about Zechariah 12, question about 10 and 11.
Yes, sir.
My first question on 10 is the translation.
Mm-hmm.
So I was reading an article by Yuri Yosef, and he was saying that the et in etashir
Mm-hmm.
should be pronounced because it's like a definitive object, and he breaks the whole thing down. It's like 12 pages on the Hebrew. So I was wondering what you think, because the Christian translation leaves it out. The Jewish translation pronounces it and says because of, and say, it's two different entities. So that was my first question. My second one was on verse 11. I'll butcher this, but the Hadad Ramon in the valley of Megiddo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess the counter missionary response would be that is a battle that Josiah died in, and it's a reflection of verse 10 that it will be a leader or a prince that will die in battle, just like in verse 10.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So that's my question.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. And just for calling in with those great questions, I want to make sure when we're done, stay on, and we'll send you a free copy of The Real Kosher Jesus. All right? Just want to bless you with that.
Okay.
All right, so number one, let's take a look at Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. Right? So this is when the nations of the earth attack Jerusalem and God begins to fight for his people. And then it says, V'shafachti al Beit David v'al Yoshev Yerushalayim ruachein v'tachnunim. So I'll pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. V'hibitu elai tesher dekaru. So I'm looking at a traditional Jewish translation that says, and they shall lament to me about those who are slain. So et asher dakaru is those about those who are slain. V'safdu alav k'misped al hayachid v'hemar, v'hamer alav kahamer al habechor. So the first thing is those words, v'hibitu alai tesher dakaru. How should those be translated? Is it right to translate it in accordance with that Jewish translation that I just read, the New Jewish Publication Society version, which is not traditional in terms of ultra-Orthodox, but reflecting traditional Jewish understandings of the text? So the key words there, et asher, what does that actually mean? In volume 3 of my series, Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, Stephen, I list example after example after example after example of that phrase, et asher, et asher, et asher. And I demonstrate that consistently it should be translated the way Christian translators render Zechariah 12:10, namely, they will look to me whom they have pierced, not about whom or concerning whom, but whom, et asher, meaning whom. It can easily be demonstrated. I know Yuri Yosef is probably more fluent in modern Hebrew than biblical Hebrew. I think he once challenged me to a debate in modern Hebrew, but I don't speak modern Hebrew. I speak a little. I'm fluent in biblical Hebrew. So let's do a debate. Right. Let's do a debate in English, only using the Hebrew Bible, quoting from the Hebrew Bible. Great. I'm happy to do that. And anytime, Uri, anytime, with great joy. And if you want to debate someone in Hebrew, I've got friends who are glad to debate you in Hebrew. In any case, so whatever he's trying to break down, I haven't seen that particular objection raised, or if I saw it, it was in the past. So it's not fresh in my head. But we can look at that phrase. And here's what I'm going to do. While we're on the air together, I'm going to pull up another piece of software, Zechariah 12:10, okay? Just to illustrate. So we'll go through this as if I'd never done this, as if I was curious to see how this actually works, okay? And we're going to look at that et asher dakaru. Now, dakaru, its most natural meaning is they pierced, right? The one they pierced. So it's not the ones who were pierced, but they pierced. That's the most natural way to read it, all right? And I don't think anyone would argue with that. So what I do is I take the words et asher, and then I scroll and on them, and I begin to look at the various times that it occurs. So based on this count on my software, 130 hits and 125 verses. So it's going to start in Genesis 9:24. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Okay, so what is et asher? Genesis 18:19. God then says at the end of that verse, God will bring upon Abraham what he promised. Et asher diber alav, what he promised. I can go through verse after verse after verse, and you'll see that it is commonly used in a direct object grammatical function. So et asher is whom. They will look on et asher they pierced, on him who, on the one whom. That is an excellent way to render it. And there's verse after verse after verse after verse after verse after verse where the Hebrew is used in the exact same way. So overwhelmingly, we can argue our point there. And anyone say, well, the Christian translators are just trying to make it mean something it doesn't mean, forget about it. We have a very, very strong grammatical case there. And again, I break it down. I go through references. I list them in Volume 3 of Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, where I deal with Messianic prophecy objections. The second thing is, notice it first says that the mourning is going to be like the mourning over a firstborn, okay? In other words, it's going to be great mourning. Is it saying that all the ones that were killed, based on the traditional Jewish interpretation, that all the ones that were killed were firstborn? No. The mourning over firstborn is great mourning. That's all it means. It's going to be great, great mourning, deep mourning, like the mourning when a firstborn son dies, and deep mourning, like the mourning in Hadad Ramon. Okay, so fine. Mourning in Hadad Ramon, say when Josiah is killed. That's all it says, great mourning. Like the mourning when JFK was killed. Like the mourning when that's all it's saying. To try to read more into that is really, really going way too far. Now, since we're talking about this, and this is something that I quote in The Real Kosher Jesus as well, I want to share a quote with you from Rabbi Moshe Alshich. He was a darshan. He was a famous preacher, about 600 years ago, and 500-600 years ago, a famous Jewish traditional preacher. And he has a commentary on many of the books of the Bible. So it's a homiletical commentary. And in his comments, and I'm just going to pull it up and read it directly for you. And by the way, I bought the newest edition, the newest critical edition of his commentaries to review a number of things that he had written, just to see, is there any change in critical text as traditional scholars have looked at his materials. And in point of fact, everything that I was looking at was exactly as I understood it to be. So let me read to you what he says about Zechariah 12:10. And what's really interesting is that okay, let me get to the right quote here. Just scroll down. Okay. I'll paraphrase it for you. I don't have it in front of me. I don't want to take everyone's radio time in doing this. I know why. It's in a different volume. Okay. So Talmudically, there is a famous discussion in the Talmud in Tractate Sukkah about Zechariah 12 and why are the people weeping? And one says they are weeping because they see that that which was slain was the evil inclination in their lives, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And they're seeing how simple it should have been to defeat it, and yet they were often defeated by it. So they're weeping over the defeat of the evil inclination, which textually is impossible. The other tradition says they're mourning over this killing of Messiah, son of Joseph. All right? They're mourning over the killing of Messiah, son of Joseph, who dies in the final great battle. And that's why they are in the state of mourning. And Al-Sheikh goes further with it. He comments on it, and this is what he said. Just located the text. Are you ready? This is his commentary on Zechariah 12:10. This is in volume 2 of Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, and I believe I cited as well in The Real Kosher Jesus. I will yet do a third thing, and that is that they shall look unto me, for they shall lift up their eyes unto me in perfect repentance when they see him whom they pierced, that is, Messiah, the son of Joseph. For our rabbis of blessed memory have said that he will take upon himself all the guilt of Israel, and then shall be slain in the war to make atonement in such manner that it shall be accounted as if Israel had pierced him. For on account of their sin, he has died. And therefore, in order that it may be reckoned to them as a perfect atonement, they will repent and look to the Blessed One, saying that there is none beside him to forgive those that mourn on account of him who died for their sin. This is the meaning of, they shall look upon me. How do you like that?
Sounds like he's almost Sounds like he's almost got it.
Yeah, so there you have it, Stephen. I appreciate the question. So stay there. It's going to be a little while before our call screener can get you. He's just swamped with calls. So stay there, and as soon as he gets a break, he'll get back over to you and get your mailing address, and our joy to send you a copy of The Real Kosher Jesus. Let's go to Lori in Spokane, Washington. Thanks for calling The Real Messiah.
Hi. I can't believe I got on so fast.
You got on. Yeah, you got in before the flood, so you're good.
Yeah, I'm glad. I have a question about Daniel 9, I think it's 26 through 27, where it talks about the 62 weeks and making the firm covenant, and then the Messiah will be cut off. And I know that you and most other people say that's a messianic prophecy and that the Messiah had to come before the destruction of the Second Temple. But I was listening to Dr. Michael Heiser give a talk, and he was talking about that verse. And it wasn't related to messianic prophecy. In this talk, it was about eschatology. But he was saying that the anointed one, it could be Messiah, but in another eschatological way that someone was looking at it, that it didn't have to be Messiah. It could have just have been an anointed one, and that person that he was talking to had a different interpretation for who that prophecy was about. And so I was just wondering if you've heard that before, or is that a common Jewish response, or is that normally that they think of this prophecy as pertaining to Messiah?
Oh, yeah. So we're talking about Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. And a critical scholar, so not a believing Jew or a believing Christian, a critical scholar would say it's got nothing to do with the end of the age. It has to do with the defilement of the defilement of the Second Temple during the time of the Maccabees, and then the temple being cleansed. So it's something that took place like 160 plus years before the time of Jesus. And there's nothing eschatological, nothing end time about it at all. That's what a typical critical scholar would say. But what's very clear is when you read the text, verse 24, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people, your holy city. Daniel has been praying about returning from exile, seeing that Jeremiah has prophesied that after 70 years, the exiles will return. Daniel realizes he's been in captivity 70 years. He prays, he cries out to God, beginning of Daniel 9. And the angel Gabriel comes and says, hey, not just 70 years, we're talking about 70 times 7, 490 years, 70 times 7, 490 years. And this is the bigger picture. So again, let's look, Daniel 9, beginning in verse 24. It says that 70 weeks have been determined for your people. And during this time, what's going to happen for your people in your holy city until the measure of transgression is filled and that of sin complete, until iniquity is expiated and eternal righteousness ushered in and prophetic vision ratified and the Holy of Holies anointed. Now, bottom line is that is messianic. In other words, what's spoken of there is not just the rededication of the Second Temple that we commemorate during Hanukkah and the cleansing of it again. No, it's talking about the fullness of sin being sin coming to its full measure on some level. It's talking about everlasting righteousness being brought in and iniquity being atoned for. These are some of the things it's emphasizing. They have messianic implications, and there are traditional Jewish interpreters that say, yes, this ultimately finds its fulfillment in the days of the Messiah. It begins at the time of the Second Temple, but it finds its fulfillment in the days of the Messiah. You can debate endlessly the timing of the 70 weeks and exactly when they start, the 490-year period. And there's several...
I've read a lot of different...
Right. Different interpretations. What I boil it down to is this, and then it does speak of two Mashiachs, two anointed ones. And it seems that they're separated by a large period of time. I have no problem with that. The first anointed one participates in the rebuilding of the city and the temple. And the second anointed one is cut off and has nothing, or cut off and not for himself. And that second one being referred to there, I understand, of course, to be the Messiah, Jesus. But the big thing is, to me, it then talks about the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the sanctuary, which happens by the Romans Titus in the year 70, right? So whatever is taking place is of epic proportion. It's of massive proportion because during this time, right, during the time of the Second Temple, everlasting righteousness is going to be brought in, and sin, it's going to be brought to its full measure, and atonement's going to be made, and the prophetic vision ratified, and the Holy of Holies anointed, or the Holiest One anointed. That all has to happen before the Second Temple is destroyed. That's my big argument. That's the whole point.
Right.
And that to me is...
Your point is saying that whatever it was, since the temple was destroyed, something had to happen. And what did they say happened? They don't have anything that happened.
Right. So a traditional Jewish interpretation, as I lay out, again, in Volume 3 of Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, a traditional Jewish interpretation falls terribly, terribly short. When you read it, it's like, and? How is this messianic? How does this unfold in some messianic way if it had to come to pass before the Second Temple was destroyed? Yeah. So without question, Lori, that's the case. That it is clearly ultimately a messianic prophecy. To understand it in any way less than that is to miss some of the import. So the term Mashiach itself doesn't mean it has to be the Messiah, because Mashiach can just mean an anointed one. It refers to different people in the Hebrew Bible. And in that passage, I believe, to two different people, one involved with the rebuilding of Jerusalem / the temple, and the second being the Messiah himself. But I know that because of the significance of him being cut off, why is that even there? And his death, and all the things that have to happen that are of messianic import. So sin finds its full expression in human beings rising up against God to crucify the Messiah. Iniquity is atoned for. Everlasting righteousness brought in by the act of the Messiah on the cross once and for all. Absolutely. Hey, Lori, thanks for calling. Stay right there. We want to get you a free copy of my book, The Real Kosher Jesus. Do we have time for another call here? All right. Let's do it. Let's go to Laura in Tennessee. Welcome to The Real Messiah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have two questions. Am I allowed to ask both, or do I need to pick one?
Well, start with one. Let's see how long it takes to answer.
Okay. So I was on Twitter, and I was having a discussion with a couple of Jews who don't believe that Jesus is Messiah, and one of them happened to be a rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that there was no evidence for the existence of Jesus outside of the Bible. And I told him about, Flavius Josephus. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yeah.
And he said that didn't count because he never met him in person. So how can we try and...
Okay. Yeah. I mean, let me just say this. Let me just say this. Most rabbis would do better than that. That's not a good example of a rabbi bringing objections. Okay. So ask the rabbi, what's the evidence, the external evidence for the existence of Abraham outside the Bible? So the text, or the existence of Moses outside the Bible, or the existence of Isaiah outside the Bible, or outside of Jewish sources, the existence of the famous rabbis of the Talmud. Okay, that most of the most famous rabbis of the Talmud are not mentioned. So that's the first thing. Second thing is this was not the days of cell phones and Instagram and Twitter. Okay, this was not the days of we're by the way, we're right at the cross filming the crucifixion. It's really brutal. Man, no, this was not the way it was. You didn't have 24-hour news. So we have, compared to other ancient figures, massive attestation compared to others about Jesus. So what do we have? We have the accounts of eyewitnesses, one after another, and detectives like J. Warner Wallace and legal scholars and textual scholars have analyzed these and said, that they are credible. You to the point that you even have like famous agnostics like Professor Bart Ehrman, a former Christian, now a very pronounced agnostic, outspoken agnostic, writing a whole book saying, of course Jesus existed. Of course we know he existed. Okay. So you do have the testimony of Josephus. It has been edited to have additions to it, but what's very clear, and Josephus scholars largely agree on, is that he definitely did write about Jesus. So By the way, how do you know they never met? That's one thing. Were their ages that impossible to intersect? Could Josephus have met him when he was very young? Put that aside entirely. He didn't meet most of the people he wrote about. He was a historian, okay?
Right.
So, it's just like saying, well, I can't believe this, the world's top scholar on Abraham Lincoln, because he didn't meet Lincoln. Yeah, he lived a few hundred years later, Anyway, Josephus, in this case, that was just the next generation. Then you have the testimony from external sources, ancient Roman sources, Greek sources that reference this Jesus. You even have traditional Jewish sources, for example, like the Tosefta or the Talmud, that make references to Jesus or to his followers, some even referencing them as miracle workers. So you have excellent outside attestation. And in terms of what we would expect, because you don't have a large number of contemporary historians who lived in Jesus' day, who wrote accounts, normally the historians would wait and then look back and write accounts looking back at history. But you have excellent attestation. So that's completely bogus. And I addressed that in volume 4 of Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. Okay, your second question.
Okay, so my second question. Separate person, I was talking to about this on Twitter, and I asked them, how come they don't do the sacrifices anymore, and why they don't see Jesus' crucifixion as a sacrifice. And he said that prayers and repentance replaced the sacrificial system. And so I asked him if that was good enough, then why did God order the ancient Israelites to give sacrifices to forgive sins? And he couldn't give me an answer to that. He said he's not a rabbi.
Okay, so first he gave you a very legitimate Jewish response, that we don't have sacrifices, but prayers taking the place of sacrifices, and that repentance was always more important than sacrifices, and we have that. Then there are also, charitable deeds and suffering we pass through, and that brings us atonement. But your question is a great question. Why did God make such a central issue of blood atonement? Why does he say that he's given blood on the altar to make atonement, because the life is in the blood? Why was blood sacrifice so absolutely central, say, on the Day of Atonement, that you take the blood sacrifices out, you remove almost everything of importance of that day that had to be done, and on and on and on. So, yeah, without question, prayer does not take the place of sacrifice. The verses in the Hebrew Bible allegedly used to prove that simply don't. I addressed that at length in volume 2 of Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. And by the way, I want to send you a free copy. of The Real Kosher Jesus. So stay right there. In a moment, we will get your address and send that out. You'll find at the back of the book a succinct response referencing to my different writings, answers to many of the common objections. All right, stay right there. Hey friends, this is Michael Brown. Over the years, going on almost 50 years now of interacting with our Jewish people about Jesus, there's so many objections that have been raised. I wrote 5 whole volumes, over 1,500 pages, on answering Jewish objections to Jesus, and then recorded a 22-hour lecture series on the same subject. But that's a lot of material to take in. I want to put something in your hands absolutely free. If you are a Jewish person wanting to find out the truth about Jesus the Messiah, I want to put this book in your hands absolutely free. It's a mini book. It's an easy read, but it's a page turner. Each new page you'll be wanting to turn the next. It's called 7 Secrets of the Real Messiah. You can get it as a mini book in paperback, or you can get the ebook. Now here's how you get it. Go to my website, realmessiah.com. That's realmessiah.com, and click on the free ebook offer, and then explore the website. You'll find testimonies of other Jewish people who believe in Jesus the Messiah. You'll find teachings we do on the feasts and holy days, and rabbinic literature, and insights from there into Jesus being the Messiah. We even have a synopsis of major objections with video and written answers, all waiting for you at realmessiah.com. Get the free mini book today.
It's time for The Real Messiah with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Join the discussion now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us tonight on The Real Messiah. Welcome to the broadcast. Before I go back to the phones tonight and respond to Jewish objections to Jesus being the Messiah, and again, if you're a Jewish listener and you differ with me, please call. I was having a bit of a dialogue with someone on Twitter, a rabbi, and he said, if someone gave him the set of my books, someone that liked our material, gave him a set of my 5 books on answering Jewish objections to Jesus, but he wanted to ask a few specific questions. And I said, well, why do you want me to respond on Twitter when you have the books and I've given you lengthy, full responses? Well, why am I supposed to now reduce it to a few seconds, a soundbite on Twitter when you ask me a question? Go, here is in the book. It's a full answer. That's where we took the time to do the research and put it in writing. And I said to him, hey, if you got an issue, just call me. If you've got any question, issue, just give me a call. So phone lines remain open to rabbis and others. And one thing we can do, if you differ with me, is I pledge to do this on my end. We can model how to have a difference and be civil about it. Because after all, we live in the same world together and we're called to love our neighbors ourselves. So in the midst of our differences, how can we do that? But before I go back to the phones, let's take a look at Isaiah 42. As God willing, I'll be in India next week, 26th time in 26 years. So my dearest friends in the world over there. Let's take a look in Isaiah chapter 42. This is a wonderful messianic passage. And it begins drawing attention to the servant of the Lord. Now, elsewhere in these chapters in Isaiah 41 to 55, elsewhere in these chapters, the servant of the Lord is Israel, but Israel is deaf and blind servant. Israel is a servant in captivity, loved by God with promises of redemption, with a righteous remnant in their midst. But the servant presented here in Isaiah 42 is clearly different and distinct and is the Messiah. So Isaiah 42 begins with these words, Hein avdi et machbo, b'chiri ratzta nafshi, natat ruchi alav, mishpat legoyim yotzi. So look, this is my servant, the one I uphold, my chosen one, in whom I delight. I put my spirit upon him. He will bring justice, mishpat lagoyim, to the goyim, to the nations, right? And then it goes on, saying that he won't raise his voice, he won't cry out, or make his voice heard in the streets. He shall not break even a bruised reed or snuff out even a dim wick. He'll bring forth the true way. So in other words, he's going to be merciful and gracious and compassionate. Then verse 4, we've looked at these verses before on the real Messiah. He'll not grow dim or be bruised till he has established the true way on earth. So he's going to persevere. It's going to be over a period of time. And the coastlands shall await his teaching. The coastlands shall await. So the distant nations will await his teaching. And then if we scroll down a few verses, let's scroll down to verse 6. Verse 6, I'm the Lord. I've called you in righteousness. I'll strengthen you. I'll strengthen you. Hold your hand. I've formed you. And look at this. Right? I've appointed you to be what? A covenant of the people, or for the people, and a light for the nations. A light for the nations. And then verse 7, opening eyes deprived of light, rescuing prisoners from confinement, from the dungeon, those who sit in darkness, Ani Adonai hu shmi, I'm the Lord, that's my name. I won't give my glory to another, and I won't give my praise to idols. So clearly, the Messianic mission is not just for Israel, but also for the nations. That the Messiah, his mission is also to the nations. He is Or Goyim, a light for the nations. The Iyim, the distant islands and coastlands, await his teaching. So I go to a place like India. According to tradition, Toma, one of the shlichim, the Jewish apostles, first century, he brought the good news of the Messiah to India and was killed for it, was speared to death, killed. There are different traditions as to how he died. There remains a Christian community in India that traces their roots all the way back 2,000 years to Thomas coming there. Why? Because the Messiah came not just for Israel, but for the nations as well. And in the providence of God and the wisdom of our Melech, of our King, he takes this rejection, our people as a nation rejecting the Messiah, as an opportunity for the good news to go to the nations, and then the nations will in turn bless the Jewish people in Israel, who in turn will welcome back the Messiah. It's a wonderful reciprocal thing in terms of the love of God and the wisdom of God. All right, having said that, what do you think about me? You're a Jewish listener. What do you think about me going and bringing the gospel to India? Now, I don't go there to proselytize. I go there to serve the community and to be with my friends and participate in Bible school graduation, those kinds of things. So I'm not going there to proselytize. But let's say that was my mission, that I went to idol worshiping people and I talked to them about the one true God, and we sent the Messiah into the world to die for our sins, and now they repudiate their idols, turn away from them. They now follow the one true God. They read the Bible. They pray for Israel, the Jewish people. You think it's a good thing? And many of you would say, yeah, that's a good thing. It's fine for the Goyim. It's fine for the nations. It's fine for the Gentiles. It's just not for us. But as I've said over and again on this very broadcast, you can't have it both ways. Because what you're saying is, it's fine for them to believe a lie, but we can't believe a lie. You say, well, who said it's a lie? Jesus is for the Gentiles. Well, that's not what he said. That's not what the New Testament says. New Testament consistently says he's the Messiah of Israel. And because he's the Messiah of Israel, he's the Savior of the world, because that's one of the missions of the Messiah of Israel, is to bring the light and truth of God to the nations of the earth. So you can't have it both ways. Either he is who he says he is, and Jews should follow him as well, or he's not. The New Testament's erroneous, and he didn't really die for our sins, and he didn't really rise from the dead. Now, some of you say, yeah, it's fine. It's false. No one should believe it. Well, at least you're being consistent. But if you say good for them, so it's good for them in your view that they believe a lie? Good for them in your view that they believe a book that's full of deception? Good for them in your view that they now give their lives to follow this lie? You say, well, some of you say, no, I don't see that dichotomy. I still think there's a way that Jesus can be for the Gentiles and not for the Jews. I see your argument, but you say to me, look, I'm okay with him being for the Gentiles. I don't have a problem with that. There's a slight issue. God says in the very account we read, that's why I read to this verse, I won't give my glory to anyone else. And yet, the nations are waiting for the Messiah's teaching. They're longing. He is the light that God has raised up. And in that sense, he shares in the glory of God. Now, if he is God's son, uniquely sent into the world, bearing and carrying the divine image, then God's not sharing his glory with anyone. All the glory is going to God. But if he's just a human being, then God's glory is being diluted because it's being shared with someone else. Something to think about. All right, listen, if you're just tuning in, what we're doing tonight, we've never done before on the broadcast, and maybe we'll do this again. Can't do it next week because I'll be in India, God willing, next week, so won't be doing a live broadcast, but we already recorded just earlier today. I think you're going to love next week's Real Messiah broadcast, so get ready in advance for it. But what we're going to do tonight, the rest of the broadcast, we've done it a few times already. If you call in and raise a Jewish objection to Jesus, it can be your own, that you believe. It can be something that you read or heard. It can be something that came up and you're interacting with a rabbi online or something like that. If you call in, well, Jesus can't be the Messiah because of this or that, you have an objection to Jesus being the Messiah, I want to give you a free book, a free copy of my book, The Real Kosher Jesus. All right? No strings attached. You have to live in the States, though. That's the only thing. We're unable to do it otherwise. As long as you live in the States, I don't care where you got the objection from. It can be something that you think you have the answer for already, but you want to share on the radio to make it a teachable moment. By all means, 866-348-7884. And let's go to Tyler in Maryland. Welcome to The Real Messiah.
Hello.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask a question about the Trinity from the Old Testament, from the Tanakh perspective.
Yeah.
To give you a bit of a background, I'm a Gentile Christian, and I'm trying to study more of the Jewishness of the Messiah. I do believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, but I want to know more about him and who his character is.
Mm-hmm.
And one objection that a lot of Jews have for the Messiah is the idea of the Trinity, the idea of a divine Messiah. And I just wanted to know if you have any insights on the Old Testament view of it. Or,
Sure.
Like, I have a few of my own. Like, for example, I don't know much about ancient Hebrew, but I know that a lot of times God refers to himself in the plural. But
right. So So Tyler, I'm happy to answer that for you. And by the way, I'm just looking on our YouTube feed. No, I'm sorry, on Facebook. Someone named Roger. In fact, I think I've seen the same question posted by the same person over and over on Facebook. Indeed, Jesus is the Messiah. He called us to worship one God, Acts 2:22. Why did you become a polytheist? Sir, I can't answer that question because I'm not a polytheist. I believe in one God only, period, as I'm about to explain to Tyler. I believe in one God only, as he revealed himself. But why are you a polytheist, though, Roger? Because it says in John 1:1 that the Word was God. Or if you want to translate it, the Word was a God, like Jehovah's Witnesses do. Totally wrong. This word, this expression from the Father, he was with God, yet he was God. What God was, the Word was. So Roger, and Tyler, don't worry, I'm going to answer your question. This is my way of starting to answer it. Roger, Philippians 2, every knee will bow, every tongue confess that Jesus, the Messiah, is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So they're going to confess that, yet the verse that's quoted about every knee bowing, every tongue confessing is from the book of Isaiah 45, 45th chapter, which says every knee will bow to Yahweh, every tongue will confess to Yahweh. So that would be someone else stealing his glory. If he's just a man, if he's not truly divine himself, when it tells us in Colossians 2:9 that the fullness of deity dwells in him in bodily form, then that would be idolatrous. So since John 1:1, even if you use the Jehovah's Witness translation, the word was a God, so then you have two gods. So Roger, it looks like you're the one that's a polytheist based on your interpretation of the New Testament evidence. I'm a monotheist, a strict monotheist, period, end of subject. So I'd answer your question when you post it constantly. I'd answer it if it had any relevance, but it's irrelevant. So Roger, I hope you are listening. Okay, so Tyler, to your question. Number one, we see that in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, God is unseen, invisible. No one can see him, and yet at times he's seen invisible. He even walks among us in earthly form. And by the way, the book that I'm going to send you for free, Tyler, The Real Kosher Jesus, the book I'm going to send you for free will open this up. I've got a few chapters that just deal with this. All right. So one, he's revealed as seen, even walks among us in certain cases, spends hours together with people. And yet elsewhere we're told he can't be seen. How do we reconcile that? He can't be seen, yet he is seen. How does that work out? He's transcendent and untouchable, and yet comes in our midst and is very touchable. How do we reconcile that? That's one thing. Another thing is that the Messianic Son is to be adored and worshiped and honored just the way Yahweh is. Parallel. Worship, honor come to both. Same words that are used. Not only so, in Isaiah 9, one of the titles of the Messiah is El Gibor, mighty God. And not only so, in Psalm 45, the king, and here is the Davidic king, a foreshadowing of the Messiah, is called Elohim, God. It's the most natural way to read the phrase, Kisach Elohim la'olam va'ed, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. And then it speaks of God anointing him, and yet he's referred to as God. So when we put this together, and then we see references to God's Ruach, not just as a force or power, but God's Ruach being grieved, God's Ruach teaching and instructing. So not just God's power, not just an it, God's Ruach leading and guiding and things like that. We put it together. We see that there is one eternal God that is visible and invisible, who sends his son into this world, and his son is honored and adored as God, and even called God, and whose ruach is full of personality and not just an it. Later theologians call this the Trinity. But its foundations are laid in the Hebrew Bible. Remember, the first believers, the New Testament believers, didn't have a New Testament. The first believers just had the Hebrew Bible. That's all they had, was the Hebrew Bible. And that was their place of teaching and preaching. And then they had the words of Yeshua that they passed on orally, and then they got put in writing, and then we had the gospel accounts, we have the letters and things like that. But initially, when they're preaching, when Peter's preaching, he's preaching from the Hebrew Bible. So that's a very, very short answer to something massively complex. Interestingly, traditional Judaism has certain ways of expressing truths about God that parallel some of these. No, traditional Jews are not Trinitarians, but some of the concepts are parallel, or at least related concepts, at least bridges that can be built between a traditional Jewish understanding and a Messianic Jewish understanding. So, Tyler, we're going to send you a free copy of The Real Kosher Jesus that will further answer your question. 866-34-TRUTH. Yeah, I think I've got time for another call here. All right, Gordon, we want to get you right on immediately over in Honolulu. May I ask, sir, how the weather is right there?
It is about 80 perfect right now, and still afternoon out here.
Got it. Yeah, it's pretty cold, even in North Carolina where I am right now. We've gotten down to the 20s some nights. Anyway, I'm on my way to India. It's going to be warmer in India. So, yes, sir, your question.
Thank you. Aloha and shalom, sir. It's kind of a follow-up to Tyler's, because I'm understanding that the Jews do not believe in the Trinity, that they don't believe in a triune God. They believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but this concept for them is very foreign. And how do you answer to those theologians or those rabbis who totally dismiss the idea of a Trinity?
Yeah, so number one, we recognize that the way things have been presented to Jewish people through the ages sometimes has seemed crass, statues made of Jesus and Mary and things like that. And, Muhammad, he thought the Trinity was Father, Son, and Mary. That's what he understood the Trinity to be. He misunderstood certain Christian teaching, and some of the iconography and imagery and things like that was very misleading. So he got that wrong. From what he understood, it was Father, Son, and Mary. So all that to say that Trinity could be understood as some type of polytheism, as even someone's been posting on Facebook, and constantly calling me a polytheist. I feel bad for the lack of understanding there, but it could be thought of as three gods, and the Jewish emphasis is on one God. We believe in one God only is the absolute central tenet of Judaism. So because of that, there's misunderstanding. And then the way the incarnation can be presented, as if God stopped being God and came down as a man. And then if you kill the man, you can kill God. Christians telling Jews, you're guilty of deicide. You've killed God. Referring to Mary as the mother of God. So these types of things have made it hard for Jewish people to understand what we even believe. That's one thing. But remember, Judaism develops in one direction and Christianity in another direction, whereas they're common roots out of which they both grow, but then they develop apart from each other. In certain ways, Christianity through the centuries is very, very far from what the New Testament taught. And in certain ways, Judaism through the centuries is far from what the Old Testament taught. So it's only natural that, here, I'll give you an example. For many years, as I travel around the world, people would offer me this food and that food. And I'd say, oh, thanks, but I don't eat that. I appreciate that, but I don't eat that. Meaning I never tasted it. That's what I meant, because I didn't like to try new foods. So I would just say, I don't eat that, meaning I never tasted it. A lot of times we say, I don't believe that, meaning I never studied it. I don't believe that, meaning I never considered it. It's almost like, you're talking to some racist, right? Some white supremacist who has nothing good to say about blacks. And you say, how many blacks? I never met one. Oh, maybe that's part of the problem. You just have a certain conception, a certain mentality. So the biggest reason that the vast majority of Jews don't believe that God is triune or a complex unity is because they've never really had a serious dialogue discussion with someone who can articulate these things to them so that they can consider it. Now, here's something very interesting, and I've referenced it on the air. There's a professor at Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, Professor Benjamin Sommer. He's a Hebrew Bible and ancient Near Eastern scholar. And he's got a scholarly book called The Bodies of God. And it's looking at ancient Near Eastern evidence and evidence from the Hebrew Bible. Now, he and I would disagree on point after point after point. The last thing I want to do is represent him as an advocate of my position. It would be totally unfair to the professor. However, he concluded after studying the Hebrew Bible and rabbinic literature that there is no Jewish objection to the Trinity. That's what he concluded. The book is called The Bodies of God and the World of Ancient Israel. So it is a serious academic work, and it's an expensive book to get as well. And I have it, of course, but you can see him on YouTube. A friend sent me a link where he's talking about, he came to a conclusion he didn't like, because the more he studied the sources, he realized that there's no Jewish objection to a Trinity. So he says we reject Jesus and Christianity for XYZ reasons. But he said we have no basis rejecting it because of Trinitarian beliefs, because there's nothing about Trinitarian beliefs in themselves that is contrary to what the Hebrew Bible says and what traditional Jewish sources say. In other words, they may not be saying the same thing, but they have similar kinds of concepts as well. So you're going to get a book, sir. We're going to send you a free copy of The Real Kosher Jesus. And in that book, we'll address that, God's complex unity. So let me say it again. I'm a monotheist. I relate to one God and one God only. But he has reached down to us in the person of the Messiah. He's reached down to us in the person of his Son, one God, whom we know as Father, Son, and Spirit, far transcending our understanding. The Ein Sof, as traditional Judaism refers to him, the endless one, the one without end, the limitless one. That's who he is. And he has graciously made himself known, not just away from a distance, but he's reached out to us. He's reached out to right where we live and gotten involved in our world while remaining transcendent at the same time. It's an amazing picture, and a picture of extraordinary divine condescension. Isaiah 57:15 says that the one that is high and lofty, who inhabits eternity, what does it say? That he dwells with those who are lowly and contrite, to revive them. Not only so, he literally comes right down into our world, and he makes himself known through Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah. Hey, we are out of time. So Gordon will get a free copy of our book to you, but we are out of time now. Got to go, but make sure you join us next week on The Real Messiah right here. I'm waiting to hear, where's that music? Where's our music? There we are. All right. God bless you. Hey friends, thanks so much for being part of today's broadcast. I want to speak to you for a moment. If you are a follower of Jesus the Messiah, would you partner with me in bringing the good news of Yeshua to the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Is there anything more sacred or precious we could do together in the Lord? Friends, we have resources we need to get out in Hebrew. We have enhancements we need to put on our Real Messiah website. We need more help to answer the many questions that come in from Jewish inquirers and from those wanting to know about the Jewish roots of the faith. And this is something we can do together with your help. Paul said the gospel is to the Jew first and also to the Gentiles. So join with me today in reaching the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Right now, take a moment and go to Ask Dr. Brown, askdrbrown.org, and click on Donate.